She stood at the edge of the grand boardroom, hands clasped, heart pounding, surrounded by men who didn't even bother to look her in the eye. Their laughter echoed off the marble walls, sharp and cruel, like glass breaking in slow motion. The air smelled of polished wood, coffee, and arrogance, and somewhere in that laughter was the sound of disbelief that she, a young black girl in a stained apron, was even allowed in this room. Moments earlier, she had only come to deliver coffee for her mother, the head server. But then came the challenge, the kind that strips the air from a room. The millionaire at the head of the table leaned back, smirking, his voice dripping with mockery. "If she can translate this," he said, holding up a Chinese document like it was a trophy, "I'll give her mother my job." The room exploded in laughter. They thought it was safe to laugh. They thought she couldn't understand. The golden emblem on the wall shimmered behind them, filled with Chinese characters that none of the men at the table could read, yet pretended to respect. And there she stood, motionless, expressionless, her mind racing, her breath shallow. Every insult her mother had endured in silence flashed through her memory like lightning. Every whispered help that went unheard. Every door that was politely shut in her face. She could feel her mother's eyes somewhere behind her, begging her not to speak, not to risk it. Because in rooms like these, silence was safer than truth. But then something changed. A memory, a promise, a spark of defiance stirred deep inside her. The laughter faded. The millionaire's grin widened. "Well," he said, "cat got your tongue?" And that's when she looked up, slowly, deliberately, and met his eyes for the first time. What came next would silence every man in that room. Because the words she was about to speak weren't in English. This isn't just a story about a girl and a language. It's about power, pride, and the moment when the world realizes that the people they look down on might just be the ones standing tallest. What happens when truth speaks in the language of those who never expected to be understood? Before that day, before the laughter and the challenge, Amara's world was small but steady, built on the quiet rhythm of her mother's footsteps and the scent of freshly brewed coffee. Every morning before sunrise, the two of them would walk side by side through the narrow streets that led to the grandest building in the city, the Crescent Club, a place where power had a voice and wealth had a face. The building stood like a monument to privilege, its glass doors reflecting the city's skyline while hiding everything that happened inside. For most people, the Crescent Club was a mystery. For Amara, it was survival. Her mother, Celia, worked there as a server, invisible to the men she served but essential to their comfort. Amara knew the place well, the echo of shoes on polished floors, the heavy scent of cigars after meetings, and the hush that fell whenever someone important entered. She wasn't supposed to be there most days, but on weekends her mother let her help in the kitchen, wiping counters or carrying trays. It was their unspoken bond, quiet moments between exhaustion and hope. What no one in that building knew was that Amara was different. At 14, she spent her nights not watching TV, but listening to old audio lessons in Mandarin Chinese. It started years ago, when she helped an elderly Chinese neighbor carry groceries up 3 flights of stairs. The woman had smiled, pressed a small language book into her hands, and said softly, "Learn this. It opens worlds." Amara took those words seriously. What began as curiosity became her secret refuge. While others slept, she whispered Chinese phrases to the glow of a cracked phone screen, repeating tones until her tongue shaped them perfectly. It wasn't about showing off, it was about belonging somewhere. Because in the world she lived in, belonging was earned, not given. Her mother often told her, "Keep your head down, Amara. Do your best, stay polite, stay quiet." It was how Celia survived years of humiliation, ignored tips, rude remarks, and the subtle, suffocating weight of knowing she was seen only when needed. Amara learned early that silence was protection, until it started feeling like a cage. On the day everything changed, the air felt different. The Crescent Club buzzed with unusual energy, a high-profile meeting of international investors. The kind of event that made everyone nervous, especially the staff. Celia's hands trembled as she adjusted her uniform. "Stay in the kitchen," she told Amara. "Don't come out." No matter what. But curiosity has a way of ignoring warnings. Through the small gap in the kitchen door, Amara caught glimpses of the men, 5 of them, dressed in tailored suits, laughing too loudly. At the center of the room sat Mr. Han, a Chinese businessman known for his sharp mind and sharper tongue. And across from him, the club's owner, a man everyone called the Millionaire. He was everything her mother wasn't allowed to be: loud, confident, and sure the world bent to his will. He had the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes, the kind that said, "I'm in control here." Amara watched as her mother entered the room with a tray of coffee. She set it down carefully, bowing her head slightly as she spoke. But then something happened. A misunderstanding, small but sharp. Mr. Han said something in Chinese, a polite correction about the order. The Millionaire laughed it off, not understanding a word, and mocked the sound of the language like it was a joke. The other men chuckled. Celia froze, unsure whether to defend herself or stay silent. Amara could see it, that flicker of pain across her mother's face. Then the Millionaire turned, smirking. "Anyone here speak Chinese?" he joked. "Guess not. Doesn't matter. They all sound the same, right?" The laughter that followed made Amara's stomach twist. She pressed her back against the wall, heart pounding. She could have spoken. She wanted to. But her mother's words echoed in her head. Stay quiet. That day didn't end there. Later, as the staff cleared the room, the Millionaire passed by the kitchen. He tossed a half-smile at Celia and said, "You've got a smart kid. Maybe she'll grow up and work here too, huh?" Amara pretended not to hear, but the sting stayed. That night she couldn't sleep. The sound of that laughter haunted her. It wasn't just about language. It was about power, about how easily people like her mother were dismissed, how effortlessly dignity could be stolen. So she made herself a promise that one day, if she ever had the chance to speak up, she would. Weeks passed. The club prepared for another major event, an exclusive luncheon with international partners. Once again, Mr. Han was attending. The staff whispered about it for days, saying this deal could change everything for the company. Celia was assigned to the same room as before. Amara wasn't supposed to be there, but she went anyway. That's how she found herself standing in that room, clutching a tray she wasn't meant to hold, surrounded by men who believed she didn't belong. Her apron was stained from hours in the kitchen. Her eyes scanned the ornate emblem behind the table, gold and blue, with Chinese characters she understood perfectly. Words about honor, respect, and truth. Words that didn't match the way these men acted. They were already laughing when she entered. And when the Millionaire spotted her, his grin widened like a spotlight. "Ah, the little helper," he said, his tone dripping with amusement. "You're just in time. We're trying to translate something, but none of us can read this stuff." "You can't either, right?" The other men laughed. Celia froze in the corner, silently pleading with her daughter not to respond. But the challenge had already been thrown into the air. Reckless, arrogant, and cruel. The Millionaire picked up the Chinese document, waved it, and said, "Tell you what, if she can translate this, I'll give her mother my job." Laughter erupted again. It was supposed to be a joke, a harmless show of power. But in that single moment, the room changed. The air grew heavy. The sound of laughter faded into something else. Disbelief, curiosity, tension. Amara's pulse quickened. She looked at her mother, at the men, at the document. They had no idea. No idea that the girl they were mocking had spent years learning every symbol, every sound, every phrase in that language. No idea that the words on that paper weren't just familiar. They were part of her. And no idea that in the next few minutes, the laughter they'd weaponized would turn into silence they couldn't escape. Because what Amara was about to do wouldn't just change their opinions. It would expose something far deeper, the truth about respect, pride, and what it really means to have a voice. What none of them knew was that the smallest person in the room was about to deliver the most powerful lesson of their lives. The room held its breath without meaning to. Sound still existed. Forks tapping porcelain in the kitchen, a suitcase rolling over the marble outside, the dull hum of the air vents, but something heavier pressed down on everything, a weight that made the light itself feel cautious. Amara stood with the tray balanced on her palms, the heat from the coffee seeping through the metal like a warning. She could see her mother's reflection in the lacquered table, still, small, braced for impact, while the men settled into their favorite posture, entertained observers of a moment they believed they controlled. The millionaire looked delighted with himself. He had offered up a spectacle dressed as a joke, and the room of men in white shirts and smooth smiles had accepted. Their laughter stretched, relaxed, reclined. To them, the wager meant nothing. The words, "I'll give her mother my job," were just air-shaped into a tease. No one in that room heard the way those words landed on Celia's ribs like a blow. No one imagined the 1,000 small humiliations that taught her to bow without bending. No one thought this was the kind of joke that could carve a family open, but Amara did. She knew it too well, and somewhere deep in her chest, something close to a match scraped against itself and sparked. She could have turned away. She could have set down the tray, ducked back through the swinging kitchen door, and let the afternoon flatten itself into the same shape as every other day. Silences were how she and her mother ate, slept, paid rent. Silences preserved tips and protected schedules. Silences kept the wolves out by inviting them to walk straight through the living room without knocking. If she stayed silent now, her mother would meet her eyes later with that exhausted gratitude that said, "You understood." If she stayed silent now, everyone would forget this moment except the two of them, and the forgetting would look like survival. But she didn't set the tray down. She looked at the circular emblem mounted behind the men, deep blue and gold, balanced between two vases of white flowers. She had studied those characters on slow afternoons when she waited for Celia to finish a shift, the ones chosen for elegance, the ones chosen to impress. Words about virtue, honor, integrity, words that made the club's walls seem noble while the rooms learned other languages like profit, status, and obedience. She followed the strokes across the emblem, feeling the rhythm of the brush that must have painted them long ago. Her tongue moved with them, silent but precise. Across the table, Mr. Hahn's eyes flicked to her, then away. He had the look of a man who expected competence from rooms, not the people cleaning them. He had already measured the club and found it impressive. He was eager to be flattered, eager to be agreed with. It was clear in the way he placed his hands. Open, practical, a man who believed in the work of building. It was also clear he had noticed the mockery heaped on his language and decided to ignore it in favor of the deal he wanted. The millionaire's smirk grew. He enjoyed the feeling of everyone arranged around him like furniture. He enjoyed most of all the idea that even a fantasy about giving away power belonged to him. Amara inhaled, steady, quiet. She didn't look at her mother because she knew what she would see, a plea shaped like stillness. If she met that stillness now, the match inside her would gut her out. So she looked past Celia's reflection to the window where the afternoon light cut a pale square on the floor. And she remembered nights when the phone screen lit her dark bedroom with phrases that sounded like songs. She remembered the old neighbor's hands guiding her through tones with patient nods. She remembered the first time a sentence landed whole and correct in her mouth, and the way her chest had expanded as if a door had opened in the apartment and fresh, cold air had swept through. She shifted the tray to her left palm and moved a single step closer to the table. Not enough to break a rule, just enough to hear the next wave of laughter with frightening clarity. It carried that special edge, the thin blade of delight that slides between joke and cruelty. She felt it graze her skin and keep going. The millionaire held up the document like a man presenting a trophy fish. Thin pages, neat columns, a letterhead stamped with a stylized seal. The text was not obscure. It was the kind of direct business Chinese that prized clarity, the kind that asked its reader to be exact and fair. He had flipped to a page with a paragraph circled in red marker, as if his own staff had been playing at comprehension. He winked at his audience, enjoying himself, and then set the paper down on the polished wood as if he had made a generous offering. The invitation was clear. It was the kind of invitation that wasn't offered to be accepted. Her mother's breath trembled, barely audible to anyone else, but to Amara it sounded like an earthquake inside a glass. Years of living in each other's pockets had fine-tuned her hearing to the music of Celia's fear. It played now in a minor key. Please don't. The rhythm of survival. The song that kept rent paid. The melody of a spine that had learned to bend and unbend without breaking. But beneath the fear, Amara heard something else. A low hum she couldn't name at first. Resolve? Rage? It lived under the fear like bedrock under soil. Solid, ancient, reliable. It said, if they will not see you, make them hear you. The head of operations stood to adjust the blinds. The room softened. The emblem's gold lining flashed. A waiter slipped in to refill water, eyes trained on the table's edge, body curved into long, practiced invisibility. He left a faint scent of lemons behind him. When the door swung shut, the millionaire started another round. He recounted a story about a time he was in China, how everything had been confusing, how he had survived by smiling and pointing. He performed confusion like it was charming. He performed the foreign as a playground as long as he could leave it. The men rewarded him with easy laughter. Mr. Han's mouth made a shape that mimicked a smile but wasn't one, Amara noticed. She noticed, too, the way the room trusted him to set the weather. If he wanted storms, thunder would arrive. If he wanted stillness, the air would settle. Her heart hammered. She could feel the moment ballooning, swelling toward decision. Her fear tried to negotiate. What if you translate a single line and leave? What if you show them you can and then vanish before they can aim their jokes more accurately? But fear had never factored in the heavy shoes of a security guard, or the brittle tone of a manager whispering about insubordination, or the sudden ability of rules to materialize only when a black girl broke them. Fear knew the steps to that dance by heart. She realized she had been standing too long without moving. She realized stillness could be misread as obedience in a way that movement couldn't. So she took another step. The chair at the corner of the table squeaked as one of the men shifted to watch her. She could feel the group attention gather, curious, indulgent, prepared to be amused or bored. No one was prepared to be taught. She placed the tray down on a side console, fingers steady. Her mother's reflection in the table's surface became a fixed star she could navigate by. Don't. But the room had pulled her into its center, and she could feel the gravity increase. She thought of the little apartment's kitchen, of evenings spent slicing carrots while the radio murmured about housing prices and new schools and politicians who said everyone had a chance if they just worked hard enough. She thought of the day her mother lost a previous job because a manager said the company needed a different kind of face at the front. She thought of how Celia had come home determined and small, both at once, and how Amara had decided that night to pick up the old language book again. She had not known what she was building toward then. She only knew the words tasted like a promise. Now, those words congregated behind her teeth like a crowd at a starting line. Mr. Han shifted a document and murmured something to the man beside him, quick and precise. His tone was not unkind, just efficient, the same tone he might use to instruct an architect or a driver. Amara heard it and translated it automatically in her head. It was about a clause, an expectation, a timeline. The kind of detail that makes or breaks deals. She knew instantly that the men on the club's side had missed it. She knew because the millionaire's smile didn't buckle. He did not register that a crucial expectation had just breezed past him and exited the room like mist. She felt an urge, not just to translate, but to correct a crooked beam before the whole structure collapsed and her mother got blamed for the draft. She imagined the club failing this negotiation, imagined the way blame would flow downhill to staff who had carried water too long. She imagined the manager sighing, if only everyone had stayed in their lane. Her skin prickled. That was how blame always traveled, quick, invisible, finding the nearest unprotected back. She took one more step, and with that the rules noticed her. The floor manager, who had been pretending to check his tablet, snapped his head up, polite smile, tight eyes. His posture said, "I have lost track of you for 3 seconds and will never forgive myself." He began to move toward her, the way polite danger approaches, swift, silent, rehearsed. She felt her mother's breath catch again. Before the manager could reach her, the millionaire addressed the room as if he owned the air itself. He wondered aloud whether maybe the club should consider adding Mandarin to the wine lists, or maybe he'd just fire the old vendor if they couldn't keep up, or maybe his favorite. Maybe language didn't matter as long as people respected the bottom line. He chuckled at his own cleverness. The men joined him dutifully. Amara realized this was not only about translation. This was about the logic that made mockery feel like management. This was about the elasticity of rules when wielded by certain hands. This was about a type of laughter that taught everyone where they were allowed to stand. She reached for the document. She did it casually, like a person moving a coaster, like a person recentering a pen. The movement was so small that the room didn't register it for a heartbeat. Then every gaze snapped to her at once, like a flock of birds changing direction mid-flight. Stillness broke into lines of force. The manager accelerated. Her mother's eyes begged. The millionaire's smile curled into curiosity, sharpened by the promise of sport. Amara's fingertips brushed the paper. The red circle seemed louder up close, a flare around a paragraph the staff had failed to understand. Her eyes slid down the page. She didn't even need to sound the words out. They came to her like old friends. The terms were precise. The tone was respectful but firm. The expectation was unambiguous. She could do this. She could do it cleanly, beautifully, in a way that would leave no room for the laugh to come back and claim victory. She could put the words into the room like a clear bell. She could show them that the person they had made invisible could illuminate the whole scene. The manager reached her elbow. His touch was gentle in a way that reminded her of a leash. He murmured a reminder about roles without using the word role. His breath carried coffee and caution. His hand tried to become a wall. She felt the old lessons rise. Don't make trouble. Don't be memorable. Don't risk the schedule. She also felt the match inside her flare again. She heard Mr. Han make a small noise of interest. He had noticed the page under her hand. He had also noticed the manager moving to remove a small obstacle. The calculation in his eyes grew complicated. A man weighing whether a momentary breach of protocol might yield entertainment or advantage. He did not look cruel. He looked practical in a way that had learned to treat people as variables more often than he wanted to admit. The millionaire settled back to enjoy whatever was going to happen. He loved moments he could narrate later as proof of his magnanimity. If she failed, he would have the story of an amusing attempt. If she succeeded, he would have the story of a room so inclusive it even let the help speak. Either way, he would own the story in retelling. That was his favorite part. Amara slid the paper fully beneath her palm. She did not remove the manager's hand from her elbow. She simply became immovable in the way a small tree becomes a windbreak. Her stillness gained weight. The room noticed. She lifted the document gently, like a fragile truth, and let her eyes move with deliberate care over each stroke. She knew exactly what it said, and exactly what the cost of uttering it might be. The cost wore many faces in her head. Her mother's hours cut, a performance review that suddenly found faults, a schedule reshuffled to erase her from rooms where tips were better, a reputation formed in whispers, too forward, too proud, too much. She knew reputations stuck like burrs to people like her. She knew they traveled faster than resumes and outlasted apologies. She also knew silence could not save them from every kind of danger. Sometimes it only delayed the bite. A memory surfaced unbidden, the old neighbor gently correcting her tones, insisting she slow down. She had wanted speed then, not precision. The neighbor's eyes had crinkled. Precision is how you earn trust from people who think your voice is a mistake. Amara had not understood the weight of that sentence until this moment. She placed the document back on the table, precisely where it had been, and stepped half a foot away, as if the paper might catch fire. The manager relaxed a visible inch, believing the crisis had passed. The millionaire raised his eyebrows playfully. He was ready to pat the girl on the head for knowing her place. The men let their attention ebb. The room began to breathe again. Amara opened her mouth. Sound did not come. Not yet. Something else arrived first. a sudden rush of images that played inside her skull like a fast-cut film. Celia kneeling to scrub a floor while a businessman's shoes stepped carelessly around her. Celia's knuckles raw in winter. The look Celia gave Amara when she brought home her report card with grades that promised escape. The way the apartment smelled when Celia cooked on payday, as if celebration had been learning to exist inside small rooms. She saw, too, the future Amara had been building in secret. Scholarships. An exchange program. A path that let her carry her mother out of rooms like this without forcing Celia to pretend she was grateful for the leave-taking. The images passed. She found her voice, and with it, a trembling she could not erase by force of will. Before she could speak, the millionaire raised a hand, the way a magician pauses before revealing an illusion. He basked in the attention that came with interruption. He announced with gentle theatrics that this was all in good fun. He reminded the room that they were here to secure something important. He said without saying that the story of this day would be about the men at the table, not the staff around it. And then he tipped his head toward Amara as if inviting a child to recite a poem for dessert. The invitation burned. She started with the title of the document in Mandarin, not loud, not timid, just true. The sound changed the temperature of the room. Men who had not truly looked at her looked now. Even the manager's hand loosened an inch. Mr. Han turned fully to face her, the first person in the room to look at her without the filter of category. In his eyes, Amara caught a flash of surprise, then curiosity sharpened into attention. He heard her tones and recognized something rare, fluency that had been earned in the dark and polished alone. She translated the first sentence with care, rendering its directness into English as if she were polishing glass free of smudges. She chose words that undid the room's comfort in tiny, deliberate measures. She paused, then spoke the line that had been circled. Its heart was a condition. Respect the labor of our team as you would respect your own, in timing, payment, and public speech. Breach it, and the partnership dissolves without fanfare. The room grew very quiet. The millionaire's smile failed to find purchase. He had expected either a stumble he could forgive or a triumph he could appropriate. He had not expected a condition that undressed his habits. The men around the table attempted expressions that ran the gamut from sagely impressed to pleasantly surprised. Amara recognized none of those expressions as real. The only real face in the room was her mother's, which had achieved stillness so complete it might break at a whisper. Mr. Han tapped the paper with a finger. He asked in Mandarin whether she had studied formally. The question carried neither praise nor contempt. It was a mechanic asking another mechanic where she learned to listen to engines. She answered, not with her mouth, which remained closed, but with the accuracy of her next translation. She included the tone of the sentence, the shape of its respect. She refused to flatten its core. She placed strictness on the table as gently as a surgeon lays a heart back into a chest. The manager's hand left her elbow entirely, not in solidarity but in calculation. He would claim later to have allowed this. He would claim later he saw it coming. He would practice the sentence until he could say it while believing it. Amara knew all this without turning to look at him. She moved through the selected lines with a rhythm that came from the nights in her bedroom, where she had parsed clauses until they opened like doors. She did not hurry. She let the meaning sit in the air long enough to be inhaled. She ignored the small shuffles of discomfort that sounded like men adjusting to new furniture. She anchored herself to breath and to the memory of a street market video she had watched so often she could smell the steam. Old men laughing under an awning, a vendor counting change, a woman selling dumplings with hands that never stopped moving. She let that world steady hers. And then she reached a sentence that changed the shape of the day again. It was not circled. It was not marked. It was simply there, quiet and clear, near the end of the page. A request that public remarks remain. Consistent with the value purported on the walls of the host's institution: honor, respect, truth. She didn't need to look at the emblem to know those characters glowed behind her. The sentence suggested accountability without naming anyone. It suggested a standard that did not bend to the comfort of the highest-paid person in the room. It suggested, gently but irresistibly, that words on walls meant nothing if the mouths in the room contradicted them. Amara felt the sentence lift its face and ask to be heard. She lifted it. When the English finished leaving her mouth, a silence followed that felt different from the other silences. It was not emptiness. It was pressure. The room had discovered a seam in its own narrative. The men recognized the seam even as they pretended not to. The millionaire recognized it too. He was good at seams. He had built a life weaving them, shut where they embarrassed him and splitting them open where they embarrassed others. He clapped once, softly, like a man hearing a piano played acceptably at a dinner party. The men followed with polite noises. The clap was a bridge back to his story about the room. He was about to cross it, but Mr. Han spoke again in Mandarin. Not to her exactly, not to anyone exactly, just into the air, the way you speak when you are testing how far a voice can travel. It was an aside about the host's earlier joke, the one that had turned a language into a toy. The sentence wore the clothes of humor but carried a small blade inside it. He said that some jokes were the kind that aged badly as soon as they were spoken. He said, too, that one measures partners by how they behave when they think no one understands them. The room did not stir. The men at the table did not look at one another. The millionaire did not flinch because he had not understood. Only Amara heard the blade unsheathe. A decision landed. She could leave it where it was, safely sheathed, or she could reveal its glint to the room. The choice stretched before her like a balcony over a long fall. If she exposed Mr. Han's aside, she might realign the balance of the room for one brief, honest beat. She might also paint a target on her mother's back that would be difficult to remove later, after the applause faded and the story belonged to someone else's mouth. If she buried it, the men would continue believing that language was a costume you could try on at will. If she surfaced it, the millionaire's mask would have to choose, a smile built for cameras or the flash of something truer. She looked at her mother. Celia's eyes were wet in a way no one else would notice. They held centuries and a rent bill at the same time. They asked nothing and everything. They did not command. They did not beg. They held open a space where Amara could put either answer and still be hers. Amara took a breath that tilted the world. She began with the safest next line, the one that returned to logistics, dates, numbers, things men felt calm around. She translated those perfectly, and in doing so, she bought herself a handful of seconds. In that small pocket of time, she searched for the shape of a sentence that could carry Mr. Han's aside into English without turning it into a fight the room would pretend not to understand. The sentence arrived. It was simple. It was clean. It would land softly and then expand. She opened her mouth to deliver it. The door swung wide. A senior member of the club's board slipped in with an apology hanging in the air like cologne. He had missed the early spectacle. Now he wanted to be caught up without appearing to have been absent. He shook hands with the millionaire and Mr. Han in a choreography of subtle hierarchies. He sent a glance across the room that skimmed over staff like water glancing off stone. He sat. The rhythm broke. The millionaire seized the interruption as a rope thrown into rough water. He could redirect now, retell now. He explained in broad strokes how the negotiation was proceeding, how the club prided itself on multicultural excellence, how even the staff participated in the day's work in unexpected ways. He gestured toward Amara as if she were a new piece of furniture he was proud to display. He promised the board member a successful outcome by day's end. The board member nodded, relieved to have re-entered the story at a point where it admired itself. Amara stood still, the unsaid sentence like a bird trapped under her tongue. If she released it now, it would feel like an attack to the people who believed the interruption had reset the clock. She watched as the room attempted to settle back. into the tale it preferred, the one in which generosity flowed from the top and gratitude rose from the bottom like steam. Mr. Hahn's gaze met hers. He knew he had spoken a sentence that asked for ethics without demanding drama. He wondered whether she would carry it across. Her answer would tell him more about the club than the luncheon could. She waited for an opening that might never return. It returned, not because the men wanted it to, but because arrogance is rarely quiet for long. One of the executives, emboldened by the board member's arrival and the Millionaire's performance, lobbed a comment about global partners appreciating when hosts didn't take everything so seriously. It wore a gloss of humor, an invitation to relax. Underneath, it suggested that offense belonged only to those who were too sensitive to succeed. The sentence landed and began to seed the ground for more of its kind. Amara felt the bird under her tongue stir. She let it fly. She translated Mr. Hahn's aside exactly, gently, as if she were placing a glass on the table so carefully the water inside did not ripple. She did not add reproach. She did not add heat. She simply let the meaning enter the room wearing only itself. The effect was quiet and devastating. The board member stiffened, not sure where to look that would keep him clean. The executives blinked. The Millionaire's expression faltered for the first time, not because he had been accused, but because something had escaped his control and landed without asking his permission. He managed a smile, thin and technical. Mr. Hahn did not move. He let the silence do its work. It was, Amara realized, the kind of silence that contained choice. The Millionaire could decide now what story the room belonged to, the one that measured success by the clarity of contracts and the dignity of partners, or the one that measured success by the volume of its own laughter. The choice hung like a pendulum. It swung toward laughter. The Millionaire stood, genial and practiced, to thank Amara for her help. He used the word the way people use kiddo when they want to shrink someone who has grown too tall too quickly for their comfort. He announced that the team would take it from here. He promised the translation department would follow up. He gestured to the manager, whose body moved before his mind registered the action. Amara felt hands lightly guiding her away from the table, away from the center, back toward the perimeter where stories wait to be cut out of photographs. The emblem's gold caught the light again in her periphery. For a moment, panic pressed against her ribs with such force she thought she might drop to her knees. The bird she had released hovered at the far end of the room, uncertain, unable to land. Her mother's presence steadied her. No touch, no sound, just gravity, the kind that holds a planet in orbit. Amara let herself be led 2 steps, then 3. She watched the men begin to talk over the same lines again, as if repetition could erase having been understood. She watched Mr. Hahn watch the men. He turned a fraction toward her. Not enough to break the theater, just enough to measure distance. She understood. He was recalculating variables. A partner who hides contempt is cheaper in the short term and lethal in the long term. A host who understands the cost of a joke might be worth more than a favorable rate. He was doing math that involved dignity and future disputes and public statements. It was the kind of math people pretend doesn't exist until a scandal demands a spreadsheet. The manager's hand tightened, not cruelly, but in a way that told a story about who writes closing chapters. The door to the kitchen stood a few feet away. The angle of its small window showed cooks moving with efficient grace, the choreography of heat and timing. If she crossed that line now, the story would harden around this room like cooling sugar. She would be the girl who had shown a trick and been dismissed politely, the mother who would be told later that the club valued initiative but preferred boundaries, the staff who would trade glances and tell the tale in whispers over trash bags and bus tubs. She stopped moving. It was not dramatic. She simply failed to take the next step the manager's hand expected. The failure traveled up his arm into his shoulder like a question. He looked at her, not unkindly, but with the focus of a man attempting CPR on order. She met his eyes, and for a second, the two of them stood inside a truce neither had chosen. Then she turned back to the table with the kind of calm that frightens people more than shouting. She addressed the room without raising her voice. She named a single clause the men had missed, one that, if ignored, would cost them not only money but the public story they prized more than money. She laid it out not as a reprimand but as a correction offered to a carpenter whose measurements were half an inch short. She did not ask permission to speak. She did not mention that she had already been asked in the most public way possible, when a man at the head of the table had wagered her mother's livelihood for sport. The words entered the air like beams slotting into place. The architecture of the afternoon shifted with audible clicks. Mr. Hahn's eyes warmed by 1 degree. The board member froze a smile onto his face that looked like it had been printed by an unwilling machine. The millionaire watched, and for the first time, he seemed to see Amara as a force rather than a prop. His stare carried the kind of scrutiny that measures both threat and utility. He was not used to seeing both in the same person unless that person looked like him. He opened his mouth to retake the narrative, but the sentence he reached for slipped off the hook. What came out was smaller. Amara felt the room tilt slightly in her direction. It was not power. It was momentum. She could ride it for a few seconds more, maybe a minute, before gravity reasserted itself and the usual weather returned. If she wanted to put anything lasting into the structure, she had to do it now. She drew a breath to finally speak the thing that had stitched itself through the entire day. The way laughter becomes a weapon when it is used to erase a person's reality. She would place it gently in clean language, anchored to the emblem's promise. She would say it once, perfectly, so that even when the men later retold the story as something harmless, the truth would have already settled in like a weight behind a wall, changing the way the room sounded forever. She opened her mouth. The fire alarm shrieked. The alarm didn't just scream, it tore the air open. Red strobes snapped the elegant room into shards of light, and the emblem on the wall, honor, respect, truth, strobed like a heartbeat caught on a bad monitor. For a split second, everyone froze, caught between posture and instinct. Then chairs scraped. A hand knocked a water glass that toppled and swung like a bell. The manager's voice rose, rehearsed and brittle. "Please remain calm. This way." He was already hurting the staff, already moving Amara back toward the door she had refused. Smoke didn't follow. No heat. Only the shriek of systems doing what they were built to do. Test who belongs and who doesn't when the world tilts. The millionaire pivoted first. Of course he did. His voice snapped above the siren like a whip. "We're pausing 5 minutes. No one leaves this table." It wasn't a request. He wanted the room to see him as the one who bent emergencies to his calendar. He snapped his fingers toward the manager. "Find out which genius triggered that." "I swear!" His eyes cut to the staff, then landed, as if by gravity, on the girl who had made the room listen, on Amara. She felt the gaze before she saw it. The alarm amplified the rush in her ears until it became a roar, but beneath it she could hear the smaller sound of decision being made without her. She tightened her fingers around the lip of the side console to steady herself. The manager guided her again, harder now. "We have protocol," he said, kindness peeled away by urgency. "Kitchen. Now." He meant know your place, dressed in fluorescent light. Celia moved at last, and the movement looked like prayer torn into action. She took 2 quick steps and placed herself between her daughter and the pull of the door. "She stays with me," she said, quiet but not small. It was the first full sentence she had dared to put into the room all day. The millionaire heard only challenge. He didn't look at Celia when he spoke. He looked at the board member, at Mr. Hahn, narrating power for their benefit. "This is exactly what I mean," he said, hands out as if he were pleading with logic itself. "You give people an inch?" He pivoted to the manager. "Get security." The word security did something to the oxygen in the room. It thinned. The door opened. A guard appeared in the red strobe, hand resting on his radio, chin lifted by training into an angle that reads as order from a distance. His eyes found Amara the way cameras find the thing they are told to look for. Not the men at the table. Not the alarm panel that might be faulting. The girl. "No, Celia said. Just that. But her hand rose, palm open like a barrier. The guard didn't touch her. He didn't have to. His presence did the pushing his body didn't do. Mr. Hahn spoke, too quickly for the room to track over the siren. He asked his assistant to check if the alarm was linked to the kitchen ducts. Casual, practical. The assistant's phone was already in his hand. He began tapping. In Mandarin, Mr. Hahn added a line that ricocheted inside Amara like a hammer. Sometimes buildings shout when people are trying not to hear. He said it softly, wryly, but the line found a seam inside her and split it wider. The millionaire's smile reappeared, plastic soft. He could make this a story again. "Hey, hey," he told the room, palms up. "No one's in trouble, just need things under control. We can't have our guests spooked." The way he weighted the word guests made it clear who counted as host. He angled his head toward Amara with practiced benevolence. "Thank you for your help. We'll take it from here." He was tugging the narrative out of her hands, the one thing she had wrestled into her grip. He would make her a footnote in his speech about excellence before dessert. She could go quiet and survive. She could walk back through the kitchen door and keep her mother fed. She could pretend with the rest of the room that nothing true had been said. The alarm went silent. The sudden quiet wobbled like a table with a short leg. Everyone waited to see where the new center would be. The manager's shoulders dropped a fraction. The board member straightened his tie as if someone else had wrinkled it. The guard's hand slid away from his radio. The room exhaled. It wanted to fold itself back into the shape it liked best. Expensive, unbothered, forgetful. Amara stepped out from behind her mother. No raise of voice. No great gesture. Just one step that put her squarely in the sight line of the emblem. Her body a thin pillar under the words the club had painted on itself. "Before you continue," she said, each syllable steady, "your guest said something you should hear." The millionaire's mouth hardened around a smile that ceased to be a smile. "We've taken enough detours," he replied. "Young lady," she didn't look at him. She looked at Mr. Hahn. The man's gaze was level, interested, alert. He hadn't asked her to carry the sentence across. He didn't rescue her with a nod. He simply did not look away, she translated. She carried the aside he'd offered in Mandarin into English as if she were laying a key on a table. She didn't add an adjective. She didn't perform outrage. She made the room hear itself. Some jokes rot the moment they're spoken. You learn a lot about a partner by how they act when they think no one understands them. The board member's eyes snapped to the millionaire, then away, then back, trying to calculate whether loyalty or liability paid better before dinner. A ripple ran along the row of executives like a wind in short grass. The manager froze. The guard waited for direction. Mr. Hahn didn't blink. The millionaire laughed, not the booming laugh that had hooked the room earlier. Not the relaxed one he used to move people like furniture. This laugh had corners. "We're all friends here," he said. "If a translation misses tone—" "It didn't," Mr. Hahn said, in English, his first direct English sentence of the afternoon. His voice was mild. It cut through the room like ice. "She's precise." Power shifted, a tiny degree, but real. The millionaire went very still, the way a stage magician freezes when a trick misfires and chooses between admitting the flaw or distracting harder. He distracted. He turned to Celia, finally acknowledging she existed, because now she could serve a new purpose. "Your daughter is very talented," he announced, projecting magnanimity over the moment like a tarp. "Let's reward that. Scholarship, mentorship, exposure. How would you feel if I arranged something formal? We love to invest in promising youth." He held the word youth the way one holds a leash. It was the smartest move he could make. Turn a rebuke into philanthropy. Convert truth into branding. Turn the girl into a story he could point at from a stage. The executives nodded, relieved by a narrative they recognized. The board member exhaled. The manager's shoulders unlocked. The guard shifted his weight back onto both feet. Celia looked like someone had opened a window in winter. Hope gusted in, and frost came with it. For a second, her eyes filled with the math of rent and school, and the way doors open when a rich man puts his hand on a handle. For a second, she almost nodded. Amara felt that almost like a hand tugging her down into a current. "Thank you," she said, and the room leaned forward for the gratitude it believed it deserved. "But I didn't speak for a scholarship." She let the sentence hang. She could feel her mother flinch. "Don't ruin this." She could feel the manager pull breath to interrupt. She could feel the guard's attention sharpen again. She turned to the emblem and read the 3 characters aloud in Mandarin. Clean, crisp, like striking flint, honor, respect, truth. She translated them into English without flourish. Then she placed Mr. Han's request beside them, the clause that required public words to align with posted values. She slipped that single line through the heart of the room and left it there like a pin. "If you want me to translate," she said quietly, "I should also translate the part where the wall talks back." For a second, no one moved. The board member's neck mottled. One executive's smile stuck and then slid off his face like something melting. The manager looked at the floor like it might provide a script. Celia's fingers, for the first time that day, unclasped. The millionaire's lips thinned until the room could almost hear enamel grind. He chose a new angle. "This is inappropriate," he said, not looking at Amara. He spoke to the manager, to the guard, to the air. "We're trying to do business. This performance jeopardizes everything. If we lose this deal, everyone's job suffers." He didn't say your jobs, but the word hung there, heavy and accurate. That was the worst of it, the way injustice traveled disguised as concern. The way punishment for truth was recast as protection for the many. Amara felt shame try to settle on her shoulders, as conditioned as breathing. "You're risking your mother's job." The sentence had claws. It had lived in her since childhood, crawling onto every thought that asked for dignity. Mr. Han supplied a different sentence. Softly, still in English, he said, "Deals that require disrespect to be efficient are the most expensive kind." The room went colder than the alarm ever made it. The board member jolted into action, the way people do when they realize they are on a stage they didn't design. "We are, of course, committed to world-class standards," he said, rescuing himself with a phrase that means nothing and everything. He glanced at the millionaire. "Let's reset." To Mr. Han, "If there's been any misunderstanding—" "There has not," Mr. Han said. "But there has been a choice." He looked at Amara. "And a correction." The millionaire's face didn't flush. It calcified. He'd been given a switch to flip, humility or dominance. He reached, as he always had, for dominance. "Remove her," he told the guard, casual as a man ordering the flowers changed. "And," he added to the manager, "Celia, thank you for today. We won't need you the rest of the week. HR will talk." Celia's hand moved to her throat like she'd been struck there. The heat of humiliation rose so fast Amara could see it wash across her mother's skin. The room blurred around that single act, the precision strike of power choosing where to land. Amara didn't yell. She didn't plead. She did the thing they couldn't prepare for. She translated. She turned to Mr. Han and, in Mandarin, translated the millionaire's words exactly. "Remove her." "We won't need the mother the rest of the week. HR will talk." She did not add retaliation. She didn't need to. The word was already screaming in the shape of the sentence. A shiver passed through the assistants arrayed behind Mr. Han, the kind of shiver that means we just watch the future break in real time. Mr. Han's eyes darkened. He spoke to his team, still in Mandarin, this time not an aside but a decision. The verbs were clean as glass. "We value partners who honor workers. We will not move forward with hosts who punish integrity." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't posture. He said it like laying down a card that ends the game. Amara turned back to English and carried the decision into the room. She didn't embellish. She didn't rescue the club with softening. She placed the words exactly where the millionaire had placed his. The effect was chemical. You could taste the change in the air. Money moved. Futures rearranged themselves. The board member's mouth opened and closed, a fish briefly displaced from water. The executives began speaking in overlapping damage control noises. "Let's not be hasty." Miscommunication. Context. Our brand. The manager looked at the floor as if it had become a cliff. The guard's hand touched Amara's forearm, light, bureaucratic. He had been trained for bodies, not sentences that alter contracts. His fingers paused, unsure what to do with a person who had just moved money by opening her mouth. The millionaire chose his last card, menace. He didn't raise his voice. He lowered it until it carried farther. "You think this makes you a hero?" he said to the space near Amara, not granting her the address of a direct gaze. "You think any of this sticks once this room empties? We know how to write the story. We know how to hire lawyers. This little moment, it disappears." He looked around like a conductor cueing compliance. "And people like your mother stay grateful for the jobs we do give them. If they're smart?" Celia's shoulders folded in as if the room itself had thumbs. Amara stepped closer to the table. She placed her palm flat on the polished wood, as if it were a page she intended to write on. She spoke without trembling now. "Maybe it disappears," she said. "Maybe you rewrite it and pass it around and clap for yourselves." She kept her eyes on the emblem. "But I know what those words mean. And he knows," she tipped her chin toward Mr. Han, "and every person who works this floor knows exactly what they heard. You can't make that untrue." She switched to Mandarin, not to impress, not to perform, but because the language had held her through nights when the world insisted on smallness. She said simply, "Truth doesn't ask permission." Mr. Han answered in the same language, a sentence low enough to belong to both of them and loud enough to bounce off the emblem. "No, it doesn't." Silence again. Hot, crowded. Outside the windows, sirens dopplered down the avenue, distant and uninterested in this room's drama. The scent of lemons and coffee lingered like an accusation. The assistant's phone lit up with a message. False alarm, tripped by renovation dust in a lower vent. An accident or not, it didn't matter. The building had shouted when people tried not to hear. The board member pivoted to salvage. "Let's all take 10, he said, smile glued on. "Cool heads. We'll reconvene." He stood too fast and his chair protested. The executives rose in a choreographed stagger, waiting to see which way the richest man in the room would point. The millionaire didn't stand. He stared at Amara with an expression she'd never seen before on a face like his directed at a girl like her. Not hatred, calculation stripped of charm. She understood, with a clarity that came like cold water, that some men only learn the shape of a person when they can't move her. Celia moved to Amara's side. She didn't touch her. She didn't need to. The air between them felt woven. The manager approached, careful, apologetic, without apology. "Please," he said to Amara, voice threaded with grief and training, "let's step out." He glanced at Celia. "Both of you." Amara looked to Mr. Han for nothing, and to the emblem for everything. The characters did not glow. They just sat there, heavy with the weight of the wall's pretense. She thought of all the rooms where words meant nothing. She thought of the old neighbor pointing at tones like stars. She thought of opening her mother's front door one day and leaving it open behind them. She exhaled, the kind of breath you take when you've given the truth its best chance. Then she spoke one last time to the room she had dragged into understanding. "If you're going to tell this story," she said, "do not forget to keep my mother's name in it." She turned, taking Celia's gaze with her. They took a step toward the door. Behind them, Mr. Han said in English, clear, public, folding the decision into something that would outlive afternoon. "Our team will wait for a written apology to the staff and a public statement aligning practice with the words on that wall. Then we will consider rescheduling. If not, we walk." The door was an arm's length away. The guard did not move to block it this time. The millionaire finally rose, the scrape of his chair loud as a verdict. "You," he said, voice cold as the silver in the room. "Don't set the terms here," and Amara, without turning, answered the room. Not the man. "Neither does your laughter." Her hand touched the door. Would the club choose the money it worshipped? Or the dignity it etched in gold and ignored? The latch clicked. The door closed softly behind them, but its echo stayed. Inside the grand boardroom, the noise of money rearranging itself continued. Quiet voices negotiating, rephrasing, salvaging. But in the corridor, there was only stillness, broken by the faint hum of the alarm system resetting. The golden emblem's reflection faded on the polished floor as Amara and Celia walked away, mother and daughter carrying a silence louder than any siren. Neither spoke at first. They didn't need to. The hallway's sterile light wrapped around them, cold but clean. Celia's hands trembled, not from fear this time, but from the shock of witnessing something she'd spent years trying to avoid. The moment her child broke the unwritten rule of staying small to survive. When they reached the service elevator, Celia finally whispered, "You shouldn't have done that." Her voice cracked halfway through. "They'll—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Amara turned to her. "They already did," she said quietly. "Every day." And then the elevator doors closed, sealing them in a mirror-lined box where truth had nowhere to hide. That night, their small apartment felt different. The lights flickered slightly, old wiring, same as always, but the air felt heavier, charged. The phone didn't ring, though Celia checked it again and again, waiting for the call that would confirm what they both already knew. She'd lost her job. Amara sat at the kitchen table, the same table where she'd practiced Mandarin every night, whispering phrases to herself between the hum of the refrigerator and the creak of the window frame. Her notebooks were still there, corners bent, ink smudged from nights she'd fallen asleep mid-sentence. But tonight, the pages didn't look like lessons. They looked like lifelines. "Mom," she said softly. "I'm sorry," Celia exhaled, long and weary. "Don't be. I'm proud." But pride was a complicated thing. It didn't pay rent. It didn't fix the power bill notice taped to the fridge. And it didn't erase the fear that lived inside every mother who'd ever been punished for being visible in the wrong place. She reached across the table and took Amara's hand. "You spoke the truth," she said. "That's something I forgot how to do." Days passed. The Crescent Club didn't call. Not to fire, not to explain. Just silence. The corporate kind. The kind that doesn't say you're wrong but says you don't exist. Until one morning, when the world finally caught up, someone had filmed the meeting. A low-quality clip, shot through the slightly open kitchen door by another staff member, a brief, shaky minute of Amara translating the line that silenced the room, followed by the look on the millionaire's face. It wasn't perfect footage, but it was enough. The internet did what it always does when truth slips through cracks. It multiplied it. Within hours, hashtags trended. Karsana respect truth. The translator. Voices they silenced. News outlets picked up the story. They called it the boardroom incident, packaging humiliation into headlines, cutting the story into sound bites. Some framed it as an inspiring tale of courage. Others called it divisive, political, exaggerated. But between all the noise, one thing stayed clear. People saw her. Amara's face was blurred in most of the clips. She was still a minor, but her words weren't. Her voice, trembling but steady, carried further than she ever imagined. A week later, she and Celia sat in their apartment as the news replayed the moment again, this time with subtitles. Mr. Han had issued a statement confirming that his company had suspended negotiations with the Crescent Club pending an internal review of conduct and ethical alignment. The Millionaire, meanwhile, appeared on camera denying any wrongdoing. "We value diversity," he said, his tone smooth, eyes rehearsed. This was simply a misunderstanding taken out of context. But the world had already heard the context. Letters arrived at their mailbox. Some from strangers, mothers, students, servers, translators, people who had swallowed words for years. Some letters carried anger, some gratitude. A teacher wrote, "I showed your clip in my class today. My students asked why they've never seen someone like you in their textbooks." Celia read every letter. Some made her cry quietly at night. Not because they were sad, but because they made her realize something she'd forgotten. Her silence had never been invisible. It had just been unseen. Then came an email that changed everything. A language institute in Beijing had seen the footage. They offered Amara a full scholarship to study linguistics and cross-cultural communication. The courage to speak truth in 2 languages, the director wrote, is the rarest fluency of all. Amara read it 3 times before showing her mother. Celia stared at the screen for a long time. "You wanted to belong somewhere," she said softly. "Maybe now you can, but belonging isn't always a place. It's a reckoning." Months later, when Amara boarded the plane to Beijing, her mother held her hand until the last possible second. The flight attendants smiled politely, unaware they were watching a lifetime of restraint finally let go. Outside, rain traced slow patterns on the airport glass. Inside, Amara looked down at her passport, the first one anyone in her family had ever held. It wasn't pride she felt. It was clarity, the kind that burns, because she knew the story the world told wasn't the same as the one she lived. The world saw triumph. She remembered fear. They saw a headline. She remembered her mother's shaking hands, the guard's gaze, the quiet violence that almost silenced her before she ever spoke. She realized the story wasn't about a translation at all. It was about who gets to be understood. In Beijing, she found herself surrounded by people who spoke the language she had learned in the dark. Street vendors, students, elders at parks reciting poetry. She listened more than she spoke. Every word carried memory. Every syllable felt like proof that understanding is not a luxury. It's a bridge built one patient sound at a time. And sometimes, the bridge reaches back across oceans. Because one evening, after class, she opened her phone to a message from home. The Crescent Club had closed for renovations. Investors had pulled out. Mr. Hahn's company had donated funds to launch a community program back in Amara's city, free language education for low-income families. The first branch, in the same neighborhood where Amara once carried groceries for her elderly neighbor. Her mother was teaching there now. Not serving, not waiting. Teaching. Celia sent a photo, her standing in front of a whiteboard, chalk on her fingers, a half smile on her face. The caption read, "She gave me my voice back," but even then, not everyone saw it as victory. Online, the backlash grew. Some said Amara was lucky, others called her ungrateful, dramatic, another kid who made race a spectacle. The comments scrolled endlessly. Proof that truth, no matter how clear, always meets resistance. Still, Amara didn't reply. She didn't need to, because every time she stepped into a classroom and heard voices pronouncing words with courage, she saw the answer. Her story wasn't supposed to make everyone comfortable. It was supposed to make silence impossible. And so, years later, when people asked her what really happened that day, what it felt like, she never started with the Millionaire or the club. She started with the emblem on the wall, the gold words that said honor, respect, truth. They didn't understand what those words meant, she'd say. But I did, because I had to. Then she'd pause, let the memory settle, and continue. Truth doesn't disappear when powerful people ignore it. It just waits. Sometimes it waits in silence. Sometimes it waits in a child's voice. And when it finally speaks, it changes more than one room. Back home, the club's building still stood, its name scraped off the entrance, windows covered in dust. Some nights, locals swore they could still see faint reflections of gold letters in the glass when headlights passed by. Maybe that was imagination. Maybe it was memory refusing to die. Celia walked past it often. She never turned her head, but she felt something each time, a reminder that what was built on arrogance never stands forever. In one of her final letters before graduation, Amara wrote to her mother, "I used to think language was about words, but it's not. It's about the courage to be heard in a world that was never built to listen. When you made me promise to stay quiet, I know it was because silence kept you alive. But speaking, that is what makes us free." Celia kept that letter framed on her classroom wall. Years later, when journalists looked back on the translator incident, they called it a spark, one of many that ignited a conversation the world still wasn't finished having. They wrote about corporate apologies, diversity pledges, PR campaigns. But what they couldn't quantify was what happened in smaller, quieter places, The shift inside people who had lived too long believing their voices didn't matter. The janitor who corrected his boss's slur instead of laughing along. The waitress who refused to be sweetheart to men who snapped their fingers. The student who raised his hand when the teacher skipped over the only black name on the attendance list. It didn't make the news, but it mattered. Because change doesn't always roar. It ripples. Sometimes Amara was invited to speak at events, universities, conferences, even embassies. She always refused the label of activist. I didn't start a movement, she'd say. I finished a sentence. And yet, what she didn't realize was that finishing that sentence gave others permission to start theirs. The last time she returned home, the city looked smaller, but the world felt bigger. She found her mother at the community center, surrounded by students laughing in 3 languages. Celia's face glowed, not with wealth, but with peace, the kind that comes only after years of being unseen. When class ended, Celia pulled her into a hug. "You were right," she whispered. "Silence doesn't save us. It just delays the truth." Amara smiled. "And truth," she said, "never forgets how to speak." Outside, the sun dipped low, painting the street gold, the same shade as the emblem that once towered over them. But this gold didn't belong to anyone. It scattered freely across faces, windows, and words written on chalkboards. Maybe the world hadn't changed completely. Maybe racism hadn't vanished, and injustice still found new rooms to hide in. But for the first time, Amara knew this. When truth finds a voice, even the walls that tried to contain it begin to crack. And through those cracks, light gets in. Because this isn't just Amara's story. It's the story of every person told. To stay quiet when mocked, to laugh when belittled, to survive instead of live. It's the story of every parent who chose safety over dignity because they had mouths to feed. It's the story of every voice that trembled but spoke anyway. Maybe you've seen it. Maybe you've lived it. Maybe you're still inside it. But what happens when you finally speak? When silence no longer feels like safety but like surrender? Because somewhere, someone is still waiting to be understood. In a classroom, a boardroom, a street, a courtroom. And maybe your voice is the bridge that takes them there. So if you felt something watching this story, don't let it end here. Share it. Talk about it. Let it be uncomfortable. Let it stay with you. Because silence protects injustice, but conversation dismantles it. And one day when someone laughs at the wrong thing, when someone tries to turn cruelty into a joke, maybe you'll remember this moment. The look on a girl's face when she refused to let her silence become their comfort. Because truth may whisper, but once it's heard, it never leaves. And maybe that's how change really begins, one brave voice at a time. Now ask yourself, when it's your turn to speak, will you stay silent? Or will you translate the truth the world still refuses to understand?